We'll get this meeting started. I'm Councilmember Jose Huizar, the Chair of the Planning, Land Use, and Management Committee. And we've been joined by Vice Chair Councilmember Cedillo and Councilmember Englander. I'd like to first go through the items on the agenda. So, if we could go to item number 2 first, and I understand this item will be continued to Plum on November 19th, 2013 per the applicant's request. I don't think we have any cards on that. So if you could read the item, Roberto, and then we'll continue that item to November 19th, 2013 per the applicant's request.
Sure, Councilman. It's an appeal by Stephen Bernheim. He's appealing the action of the South Valley APC relative to a specific plan exception. And as you indicated, the item is being continued, Councilman.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll go to item number 3 now.
Item 3 is Mr. Legrand's weekly report.
Welcome, Mr. Legrand.
Good morning, Chair, and congratulations for chairing this committee. We're very excited to see the new member Cedillo and yourself in these roles, and look forward to continuing to work with Councilmember Englander serving the Plum Committee. A few things to report. We had an excellent public hearing today on the Ponte Vista project in Council District 15 in the harbor area of the city, and we'll be bringing that project forward through the Planning Commission, then onto the Plum Committee and City Council in the next few months. In addition, yesterday we had an expert panel convened for the health and wellness chapter that we're working on for the general plan for the city of Los Angeles. We had people from academia as well as people in the health industry, county officials, and a number of health organizations and climate change groups, helping us focus our work program around updating the city's ways of creating more incentives for healthy lifestyles and healthy food choices in many parts of the city of Los Angeles. So we look forward to that great output coming through our policy planning units. And that concludes my report, and I'll be available for any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions for our Mr. Englander?
Great, thank you very much. Just wanted to see if we had an update on the consolidation efforts and review of a consultant and where that might be in the process.
Yes, thank you. It's going actually very well. The consolidation of the departments of city planning and building and safety, along with functions regarding development review from Department of Transportation, Bureau of Engineering, and the Fire Department. We've been having weekly meetings headed up by the CAO's office in concert with the CLA. All the departments have been attending, and we've had some great outcomes working in ad hoc working groups with city staff to try and come up with ideas on trying to streamline the process, reduce redundancies, and make it a more customer-friendly development process. In terms of the consultant, we've gone through the RFP process and through bid letters, and there were interviews today, and the final selection shall be made on Thursday. We had 3 proposers, one of which was disqualified, and that left 2 proposers left. And the scoring was completed today, and I believe notice to proceed will be issued on Friday. But the process is going very well, and we'll be coming back shortly to the Plum Committee to answer any of your questions and give you an update, and as well as start the working group, which Councilman Huizar will be a part of.
So we can make sure it's just in the most transparent manner. Will we be getting regular updates? And
yes, you will.
The next one will be coming shortly?
Yes, we agreed to quarterly updates. We can come back in a few weeks and give you another update.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Englander. And I think, Mr. Englander, that was part of the direction we gave when we adopted that, is to have, I'm not sure if it was quarterly, but we quarterly reports to Plum on the progress. Okay. Great, thank you. Next item.
Next item, council members, is a city attorney prepared draft ordinance to regulate murals in the city.
Thank you, and I'm really happy that this item has come to this committee, and I think we've heard this item in this committee for a few times already, and I think it's time to go back to help make the city of LA known as the mural capital of the world once again. Public art certainly adds to not only the aesthetic beauty of the city, but it helps educate us, helps express ourselves, and helps give a history, whether it's of the city or people or other people or things that are happening around the world. I've given my story of how when I was growing up in Boyle Heights and I would walk around and see some of the murals in Estrada Courts and other parts of Boyle Heights, they certainly educated me in terms of my identity, and saw things on those walls that I'd go back to my classroom the next day and ask what was that about, things I wasn't learning necessarily in the classroom. But I'm very happy that it's here today, and I want to thank everyone who's been part of this. We've gone out to have several community meetings, stakeholder input, and I know our staffs have been working hard on this for some time. This committee has also given some input the last few times, and I'm hopeful that today, after today's discussions, with some minor changes, we can move forward to the full council. So with that, unless there's any other opening remarks by my colleagues, I'll turn it over to the city attorney's office, and then we'll still have a time for discussion. Okay. Mr. Cedillo.
Well, having grown up in the same neighborhood, I share your concerns. Los Angeles is a vibrant place. Let me repeat myself. Having grown up in your same neighborhood 2 blocks away, obviously we share the same appreciation for the contributions that the muralists have made to our city, and not just to the east side of the city where there was a renaissance in the 70s, much like the great muralists of Mexico with the great traditions of Siqueiros and Rivera and Tamayo, but also throughout the entirety of this city, a great richness in terms of the cultural topography of our city. And so it's important that we preserve that and recognize that, and that is in all communities that are vital and vibrant. That type of art, that type of cultural, those cultural icons are critical to a vibrant community. And so we look forward to lifting the ban and look forward to a policy that is the most comprehensive and supportive of the arts and the artists who grace us with their genius. And so I thank you, and I look forward to us figuring this out this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo. Mr. Englander?
Thank you. As many of you know, I've been meeting over the last several months with many neighborhood councils and stakeholders, the artists, muralists, organizations, and have gotten really involved and very interested in this issue, and cultural affairs and the general manager and others. And I've taken an inventory, if you will, of these issues and trying to figure out where we're at. And let me first start by saying that I think both of my colleagues nailed it, that we do absolutely enjoy and need, and I say not want, but need these murals to tell a history of Los Angeles through the years. And they're critical in a lot of communities, in most communities, if not every community. And if you look at all the way going down to Venice or different parts of the coast where you see surfers have their own style, from Boyle Heights to Hollywood, where you see various artists depicting former icons in so many different ways. It's really important. And I think the LA Times editorial actually did a very good job of capturing and articulating the issue and where we're at today on this. And if for those of you who haven't read it, I'll share some of it with you, if I could, if the chair will allow me just a couple minutes. But it starts off, and the headline was, if LA's walls could talk. And I thought that was very fitting. Murals are a part of the city's cultural history. In a city void of its lack of historic consciousness, murals tell a narrative of Los Angeles. Whether they're great art, some are not, is almost besides the point. They are part of the cultural history of the city and its people. And since 2003, there have been an absolute prohibition on the creation of any murals on private property, and we had to struggle with that for some time because they were lumped into off-site signage and the billboard issues. And I think Mr. Reyes did a very good job of bifurcating the issue, trying to figure out a way, as the former chair of this committee, to get beyond that and separate the public art conversation and dialogue and what murals are and the intention of them and the benefit they bring. And in fact, really enlightened me, quite frankly, on a lot of the other benefits besides public art and culture that they bring, but they also bring out the opportunity for at-risk youth to get involved civically and get engaged in the art. There's a lot of organizations and artists that work with youth throughout different communities that once they do that and take pride in their community, it's less likely that they're going to get involved either in gangs or become graffiti artists, the other artists, as some of the muralists call them. And so there's a lot of benefit. It goes on to say that it's time for LA to lift the restriction and replace it with an ordinance that protects existing murals on private property and creates a process for new ones. I couldn't agree more. It is that time, and the city will take up 2 versions of the proposed ordinance that will legalize murals on private property. Both versions grandfather in all of the city's 300 or more existing murals on private property and allow new murals with common sense parameters. And that's what we're really here to talk about today, are the common sense parameters. What makes sense? And I think when we start getting into the details and follow some of the logic, and when we start creating new laws, that's really where the rubber meets the road, if you will. That's where we have to make sure that we protect the intent and the spirit of what's behind all of this, as well as what we can anticipate where it could go if in the wrong hands, as well as protecting communities, and it's creating that balance. And I think with both ordinances, with a few minor modifications and ideas that I have as well, I think we get there. Quite frankly, I think we're very close already. And then it goes on to say, should the proposed murals go before neighborhood groups for review? Should the Department of Cultural Affairs have final approval of your murals, and on what criteria? And the thorniest one, it says, should murals be allowed on private property, including houses in single-family neighborhoods? So there are 2 different versions of that, so you all know. One that includes private single-family residence and one that does not. We've also gotten a lot of feedback and correspondence from different stakeholders and neighborhood councils on that particular issue. And should those neighborhoods be allowed to opt out of that provision? And so I'm delighted and excited that we are at this point where we're here to move a good piece of legislation forward. Again, it's the details, and I think we're close to that. But I also wanted to thank our chair, Council Member Huizar, because he has been extremely passionate from the beginning on this for all the right reasons, and deserves a lot of applause. And taking a pause and taking a time out and saying, let's get into the details. Let's move it forward, but let's get into the details so we can do it right. So, no good deed goes unpunished. There's always that one person, that one incident, and you can't plan for all of that. That takes advantage of a loophole, and certainly every piece of legislation has some opportunity to be taken advantage of, but this is for the greater good, and that's what we've got to look at. So I wanted to thank you, and thanks for allowing me a few extra minutes.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Englander. Appreciate your comments, and thank you for your attentiveness to this issue as we move forward. I think your contributions have made this a better policy for the city. So with that, we'll turn it over to the city attorney's office and get started on this.
All right. For the record, Ken Fong, Deputy City Attorney. First, I'd like to personally welcome Councilman Cedillo to the committee. We have a lot of fun here. So I'm going to give a brief recap of this ordinance and then tell you what we've done in the City Attorney's Office. At your January 15th, 2013 meeting, you instructed the City Attorney's Office to prepare the final draft of the ordinance, which is before you today. In preparing the final draft, my office followed the instructions set forth in your February 21, 2013 report. Let me briefly go over those. When this ordinance was at the CPC made 2 significant changes to the ordinance before sending it on to your committee. The first change allowed murals to exceed the height of the structure on which it is attached, and the second change allowed murals on lots that have a minimum of 2 single-family residences. Then when this ordinance came to your committee, the 3 departments that had been working closely on the ordinance, the Planning Department, the Department of Cultural Affairs, and the city attorney's office made several recommendations to your committee, which your committee reviewed at the January 15th meeting. And these are set forth in the planning department's January 4th, 2013 report. Your committee agreed with all of the staff recommendations, except you decided that instead of having a registration process for vintage original art murals, there would be automatic grandfathering. So that's how the ordinance is drafted currently. Your committee also amended the ordinance to allow murals on lots that have only one single-family residence on it rather than the two residence requirement that the CPC had placed. So when I prepared the final draft of the ordinance coming out of the city attorney's office, because I knew that this was a topic that the committee had gone back and forth on and that it might possibly change, I prepared version A and version B. Both versions are identical, except that version B changes the qualifying number of single-family residents on a lot from one single-family house back to the two single-family residences that the CPC had recommended. So it's a policy decision, and I'll leave it. It'll be to the committee to decide. We also realized that the grandfathering issue has been a subject of much discussion, and if that were to change, it would be an easy matter for me to return that to the registration requirement for vintage art murals. There are also a number of technical changes that I recommend that you make, no matter which version you adopt. The first is proposed section 14.4.20, the last sentence of the first paragraph. I would recommend that you return to the language in the January 4th draft ordinance from the planning department, and that reads, a building permit from the Department of Building and Safety is required for new hand-tiled or digitally printed original art murals and all public art installations. The reason for that change is that DBS has informed us that they would require a building permit for that type of structure, but they would not require a building permit for murals that are solely painted on. The second change would be, if you decide to go with version B of the ordinance, I would recommend that you take out the delayed operative date of 90 days, which had been added when there was a thought that if a community wanted to initiate a sign district to prohibit murals on single-family houses, lots that have just one single-family house, they would be allowed to. But if you go with version B, it will have the CPC requirement of two single-family houses on a lot, so you won't really need the 90 days. The third change is to delete the citywide sign code's current ban on mural signs to avoid inadvertent use of that prohibition against original art murals. And so technically, I would add back sections 1, 3, and 4 of the Planning Department's January 4th version of the ordinance. And the final technical change I would recommend is at the bottom of page 4 of the ordinance, proposed section 22.119B1, I would add the term vintage art mural immediately after the term original art mural, and the purpose of that would be to make it clear that the Department of Cultural Affairs has the authority to register vintage art murals if that does become necessary. All right, thank you, and I'm available for further questions.
Thank you. So those are your 4 recommended amendments. Any questions on the amendments, Mr. Cedillo?
I'm wondering, with all due respect, it seems a little more substantive than technical. A building permit from the Department of Building Safety is required for new hand-tiled or digitally printed original art murals. What's the rationale on this if we're not talking about buildings but art in this instance? So we seem to be creeping or broadening jurisdiction for DBS over a matter that would not normally be under their jurisdiction.
Well, yes, thank you, Councilman. I've been informed by Building and Safety that historically they do require building permits for murals and other signs that have applications of, for instance, tiles that need to be adhered properly. But I would also suggest that if there's a representative from Building and Safety, that you might inquire as to their substantive reason for the change.
Okay. Is there a rep?
Is there someone here from Building and Safety?
Good afternoon, Luke Zamperini, Chief Inspector, Department of Building and Safety. The building department requires permits for any change to the exterior of the building, whether it's attaching a sign or any type of material, or making any changes to the actual surface other than paint. So that would be required regardless if it was art or not.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I guess the question, so what would, excuse me. So what would be those that were not art? Give us a 1, 2, 3 examples.
Well, commercial wall signs would be one. We would regulate the method of attachment, how they would penetrate the exterior of the building to attach the sign panel. The same would be true for attaching veneer to the outside of a building, much like tile. It's a material that is affixed to the building through some kind of adhesive. So that would be the only time we would need a permit, is when they're using those materials. Other than that, they can paint the wall and we would not be involved.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Englander?
Just a question on the recommended changes, your 4 changes. I concur, I believe, with all of them. My question, though, on B, where you were talking about the very specific sign district protections in place, that's correct. It would not be necessary because it pertained and referred to only single-family residents.
Yes.
However, shouldn't the language, though, instead be on B, just in case, so there were some protections on some neighborhoods that may opt out, if you will, instead of, since that language on B only refers to single family, it should then just be amended to say on multifamily or on the 2 or more, just to be updated with the language. That would be my suggested change based on the input from the neighborhood councils. And I mean, I think there would be few, if any, that would opt into that because it's costly and it's timely, and it would be a lot of effort for somebody to go through that. But instead of taking away neighborhood protections, it would still have a place for it.
Okay, that's fine. It's a pure policy issue. I leave it to you. Now, the only drawback is if you have the 90 days, that delays the effective date of the ordinance for 90 days.
Okay, but we can...
You know, it doesn't have to be 90 days. You could do a shorter period if you wish.
Right. So, well, 90 days isn't even enough time for somebody to actually go through that process. It would be in the extreme case where there was a particular neighborhood that was willing to come together and spend that kind of money and resources and go through that process, which would be very difficult. So 90 days is reasonable.
Okay, so I'll leave that to the committee as to whether you want to leave the 90 days in or not.
So I would suggest we just update it to reflect version B rather than striking it out completely.
Okay.
It's minor, but it's a minor technical. Just based on your recommendations thus far.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So with that, let's now go to our planning department and the Department of Cultural Affairs. Do we have representatives from both those, please? Planning department? Any comments on this?
Tom Rothman, Planning Department. We've worked very closely with the City Attorney's Office on the last 4 changes, so we just concur with everything that Ken had just said. If you want me to go into the background of the mural ordinance, I'd be happy to do that.
No, we're fine, unless you have anything to add that's new.
Nothing.
We've had full presentations from the planning department before, so we're okay. Okay. The Department of Cultural Affairs, anybody here who would like to? I thought I saw the general manager walk in.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Olga Gaday English. I'm the Executive Director of the Department of Cultural Affairs. First of all, I want to thank you all for sticking with this. It's been, since I got here 6 years ago, I just had my 6th-year anniversary at the City of Los Angeles, and we've been working on this topic. So I really want to thank you all and your staffs and City Attorney's Office, Planning, Building and Safety, and my own staff, because this has been really a Herculean effort on everybody's part. But I especially want to thank the muralists and the arts community that has just, again, been such a participatory part of this very democratic process. Like planning, we have been working very closely with the Attorney's Office, and so we concur with the recommendations that are in front of you. As you know, there are 2 options, and that's really your bailiwick in terms of policy. And so we have established some draft guidelines and regulations as we were asked to do. Those have been submitted to the clerk's office because we realized that there might be some additional changes as just happened here. So we will be working with the city, with this committee to finalize our regulations and before they go to City Council for a full hearing. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, Mr.
First of all, I want to thank you for sticking the course on this as well. And I know you've been a proponent of just getting this done and for the right reasons. And by the way, when we just went through the budget process, something that I learned recently, and I've been here 10 years, but under Olga's management as a general manager, the one department that she takes her budget and doubles it every year because she's able to go out there and get on the phone and raise money philanthropically from organizations and philanthropists and individuals and artists, because the budget that she gets doesn't go even far enough to where her goals and vision is for the Department of Cultural Affairs. So I heard that recently in budget. Imagine, if you will, if we can get half the managers to do half of that kind of fundraising, because they're that passionate. So you got to be applauded. Not only and most people probably aren't even aware of that. And that money actually goes right back into the community to put on cultural programs with musicians and artists, working with all different types of communities, different ethnicities, and all different backgrounds. And so it's really incredible. You got a great story to tell. You should tell it every time you get a microphone.
Well,
So
thank you. It's nicer when you tell it.
Yes. With that, just one thing in looking at all this, and it's incredibly complicated to really get your arms around and figure out, what one person considers art, and one may not. We're trying to create the path of least resistance, which makes sense. And so particularly as I think we don't want to step on the toes of what one considers artistic, but also just as important First Amendment rights. And so there's this very delicate sort of balance. There's been a couple issues that were brought up to me when we were out there actually presenting this to neighborhood councils and talking to folks. I had sent a letter out on this to all 95 neighborhood councils, as you well know, saying, please weigh in. This is going to affect every community. While we want to move forward, we want people's input. And that's what neighborhood councils have really been asking us to do on a lot of citywide issues. We're doing it on another project I'm working on to fix every street in LA. But we're looking to the community more for input, and more now so than ever, and I think that's a good thing. 2 things that they brought up to me were, one is, what if a company gets really tricky in product placement, for example, where 99.9% of the mural is a person running. It's a runner, but they've got the big Nike swoosh on their tennis shoes. And as an example, nothing against Nike. In case they're here, we don't want to get sued. But and they were the ones that paid for the mural to go up, because under this, private property owners can receive compensation from companies to put murals on their homes or businesses. That's what this is about as well. It says that. And the compensation doesn't have to be disclosed, and the amount doesn't have to be disclosed, and all of that. And the person paying it doesn't have to be disclosed. So all of a sudden you start seeing, and this runner, maybe she's running down the street carrying a can of Pepsi or something, where, it was artist prerogative. So that question came from a couple different neighborhood councils that we received in writing. What happens if people get tricky with product placement? We can't really catch that, but it really becomes product placement, and there could become a proliferation of that. Because unfortunately, I don't think individuals are going to try to take advantage of this, but I think companies are the ones we don't trust. But so how do we get in front of that?
Ken looks like he's chomping at the bit.
Well, okay. City Attorney here, if I might step in here. We have dealt with building and safety and planning on this issue for probably more than 10 years now with regards to signs. And so I just want to remind the committee that you're right, it's a delicate dance that we do. And so in order to have what are called time, place, and manner regulations, which this ordinance would be, you have to be pretty much content neutral, not really looking at the content of what's allowed up. You can place reasonable size restrictions, location restrictions, etc. But the courts don't like, for obvious reasons, a city to look at content and say, I like that one up, and then I don't want that one up. So we can't do that. But then at the same time, the courts have allowed us some flexibility. For example, we can differentiate between on-site and off-site signs. So we can allow people to have on-site advertisements for their businesses that are located at that site, but then we can prohibit off-site commercial advertisement. That is constitutionally allowed. And then also there is case law that talks about cities' ability to differentiate between non-commercial and commercial content. I mean, not really content per se.
But can you speak specifically to the product placement scenario?
Well, yes, and we have, in the course of preparing this ordinance, both my office and planning canvassed other cities throughout the country that had mural programs. And I remember that, I think it was the city of Philadelphia, they had a program where they incentivized murals on dilapidated buildings. And there were instances where there was, some beer bottles and kind of placed within the murals, and I think some of those created controversy. Now the problem that we're going to have is, unfortunately, the Department of Cultural Affairs and Building and Safety, just as it happens with signage, they're going to be stuck in the middle, because there are murals and there are signs where it's very easy to make this distinction, but then there are ones where it's not. For example, I always use this example, and I know it's a very old example now, but I still think it still works. The old Andy Warhol Campbell soup, those were lithographs and they were sold as art, but it's still a commercial advertisement. So it's very difficult sometimes to figure out what is actual commercial advertising and what is so-called art. So, we're going to have to deal with this on a case-by-case basis.
So therein lies the question: is how do we deal with it on a case-by-case basis? Is there anywhere that is there a provision to deal with any of those scenarios should they come up?
I would respond to that. The time, place, manner distinctions We were very deliberate about framing those so that they would discourage advertising. So the murals have to be up for a minimum of 2 years. Most advertisers want to change that message periodically. So it also has to be at a certain height, and most advertisers want their signs to be way up so that motorists can see them.
Well, this can go up to 100 feet.
I'm sorry?
This could go up to 100 feet.
Correct. But most billboards are way over 100 feet. And so we were trying to deter, using the legally available tools to us, the kind of advertisement that you're concerned about without getting into First Amendment issues. I mean, just the time requirement is enough to,
Yeah, I got a question on that, too.
Okay.
So with that, one other question on the content. And I know it's going to be difficult to balance that then,
Yes.
depending on what comes in. But we don't have any way in here besides the time limit, which I do have a question on, and I'll get to that, to deal with if there is an issue, or it becomes blatantly clear that it was in fact an advertiser and that wasn't the intent, and then we've got this, we're sort of stuck with it. There's no other way to do, is there a way to deal with that?
Well, I think hopefully what happens is when they propose a mock-up of what they're going to put up on a wall, at that point,
Maybe we can catch it.
yes, I mean,
Okay.
that would be the hope. I mean, once it's installed, it becomes much more difficult.
Right. So
But-
maybe perhaps if there's a way by motion for an investigation, if that's required by a particular council district in a unique situation, I think that would probably be the way to deal with it.
Well, yeah, it might. It's going to take some, this will be an interesting endeavor.
Yeah, well, it raises a good question, and those types of issues, whether it's art or commercial speech, who will adjudicate and decide, make that decision? Is it building and safety? Are they prepared? Do they have a panel, or how do we envision this working?
Well, I think building and safety has had its fair share in the world of signs. So now I think they're sharing with cultural affairs the ability to make these difficult decisions. And
I'm okay if it's culture, whoever it is, as long
Yeah,
as
I
we
just-
all know it's somebody.
But we don't have yeah, you raise a good question. We just don't know what that process would be like. I would imagine, absent any direction, it'd be building and safety, because they're the ones out there, right? I mean, I think they would, but I just don't know how that
it
would
could
work.
be a joint effort. I do want to reiterate that the whole community review process is supposed to mitigate these issues as well, so that when an artist and a property owner go in front of a community review process, they have to submit renderings, they have to submit what it is that they're going to put up. If it's radically different, then I think that we have some room to
yeah, and I just want to remind the committee that my office has been working closely with building and safety and planning. So the main thing that we try to do is ensure consistency, because these are extremely difficult decisions, but the best you can do is try to be thoughtful and consistent.
Well, the best thing we can do also, quite frankly, is to have a process in case we run into a problem and we all understand what the process is going into this.
Yes.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes.
And so, with all due respect, I think we're all comfortable with whatever that process is, as long as we knew there was a process, not that the answer is there's just been a lot of work done on this.
Yes.
And so, one other thing on that note is, and the review process by the community, by the way, they have no input whatsoever. It's simply a review process. It's, by the way, this is what's happening in your community. We wanted to make you aware of it, but you don't have any input. I mean, we need to be honest with what it is. And again, it's better than not having any process. I agree with that. But that's the entire process.
Well, that's true, and
they don't have any input.
That's right. I personally have to take blame for that, because we can't have the community, taking a veto on every artwork that's going up because of First Amendment.
I understand the reason behind it.
Yes.
Okay. So I understand the reason behind it, and I'm not asking that we change that process because of the reason behind it. I just want to put it out there that we all understand exactly what
Yes, I think that's a good
community review
idea.
process means. And so it's not really up to them to catch something. It's more of an informational, not even a hearing. but information dissemination, if you will, of sharing with the community of here's what's happening. That's really where it stops. There's not even a place to gather
Well, that's true. Now,
thoughts or comments. So
yes.
that's why I think it behooves us to have a confirmed process in place that if there is an issue, and I want to bring up one other example that was brought up to me recently by another council member that was questioned in their own community. What happens if it's art, it's not product placement, but it's culturally or ethnically insensitive? And the example that was brought to me was what happens if there were, and this is the one that was shared with me, if there was a very ethnic part of town, and this example was a Jewish part of town, where an artist decided to put up a rendition of the Third Reich and Hitler right across from a temple in a very Jewish part of town. It's ethnically insensitive, and it's art.
That's right.
And could cause major community disruption. What is the process then of a community or anybody or even a council member saying, well, wait a minute, this was one very insensitive property owner who maybe himself was or herself was racist or had other issues, and it's not considered racial hate. It's not a hate crime or hate speech. It's their own private property, and they commissioned an artistic piece depicting that period of time
That's right.
in society, but certainly was not fitting in that community whatsoever. And you can almost speak to almost any community in Los Angeles that has pockets, if you will, of very culturally sensitive communities. How do we deal with that after the fact?
So I'm going to ask our Director of Public Art, Felicia Filer, to address that issue.
Thank you. As Olga mentioned, the process to develop and get registered a new mural does involve a community process. It involves communication with the property owner, as well as the artist, as well as the constituency. In thinking about this process and developing a set of regulations, the community, as well as cultural affairs and city attorney, we have tried to develop a response or process that meets sort of the highest ideals in our society, and that if a property owner is going to allow a muralist or an artist to paint something that is derogatory on their building, that they too have a responsibility for that work. And the community that lives or works around that space will make their concerns known to the property owner, and if there are some needs to change that image, then that dialogue should take place at that meeting. But the responsibility to correct that image is not solely that of the artist, in my opinion, but it is also of the property owner. And we think that the neighborhood involvement process, a depiction of the image of the mural, will begin that dialogue.
But it sounds like a balanced approach, and I don't mean to complicate it, but it's really simplified, and you're bifurcating an artist from the property owner. Very well could be one and the same. And in fact, a property owner can design it, and it doesn't even have to be painted because it could be digital art, so they can design it on their own computer. It doesn't necessarily mean there's...
That's not accurate, Councilman. The digital process also involves artistic rendering, both in the original image as well as how the image is transferred.
I understand
to the
that, but my
computer.
point is that the property owner could very well also be the artist,
Sure.
or
And there are
commission it,
examples
or
of
commission
that.
it from some other artist who lives in another country. I mean, it doesn't have to be a local artist in the community.
That's correct, but even if the property owner was the artist, they would still have to have a community involvement, a neighborhood involvement process, so that the neighbors that live in that area would see an image of what they are proposing to put on their own wall.
Right. So if we take that logic a step further, and I appreciate all the time. I've given this a lot of thought, clearly. And again, I want to move this on. I think we should. I just think we should have the answer so we vet it in all scenarios, because they've been approached, and I've been approached by other stakeholders citywide, actually, on this, and other council members and asked for me to ask some of these questions.
Councilman, can I briefly comment on the last question that you had?
Yes, please.
You know, it's a very, you raise probably the most tricky question and the most troubling issue involved with a regulation of this kind, because we cannot regulate content. And there have been numerous Supreme Court opinions. I'll just give you one that I remember vividly, and it was a public march in Skokie, Illinois, where somebody was wearing, I believe it was a Nazi swastika. And the Supreme Court said, you know, we don't necessarily agree with their message, but they have the right to express that message because we can't regulate on the basis of content. So I think that that applies to this type of regulation as well, because it's a time, place, and manner regulation.
I agree and concur with that. The difference here is what we're doing is about to, right now they're banned, and we're going to then allow them and recognize
That's
that.
right.
So we have an opportunity to not further regulate, but to make sure some of these loopholes are closed. So it takes me to the next, and hopefully maybe the final question on this. So with that, we have also a provision here that says the property owner, it shall remain for a minimum of 2 years. So once they've gone through this process and exercise, it shall remain. It has to be there for a minimum of 2 years, unless the property is sold. So all of a sudden, you've got perhaps somebody that went through the exercise that a few people just didn't either catch the insensitivity or the whatever that might be, didn't catch the fact that there'd be community uproar, they would be upset about it, whatever the case is. And perhaps, you know, that person put the mural up on their private property and then realized, come to learn, the community really didn't appreciate it and wanted it down, and they were willing to take it down. They can't, unless they sold their property. It seems like we get into private property issues with that as well. It's like if somebody painted their home and we say, well, it's too bad that you didn't like the color blue and how it turned out. You have to keep it there for 2 years, unless you sell it, and then only a new owner can then paint it. It doesn't, I can't understand the logic, although I'm sure there's plenty of good explanation. And one of them you said earlier is to prevent advertisers from coming in and saying, okay, it's only going to be for 6 months. But I think we need to have another process, whether it's, even if it's done by council motion, to allow somebody exempted out of that 2 years in those unique situations. We've got to have some protections somehow on the property rights as well, because if they're putting them up, they should very well be able to take them down, because there are a lot of scenarios where you can see that happening. What would you suggest as language should the committee decide to move forward in either removing the 2 year minimum or having some type of process to allow them out of it? And I think we need to explore that. If we can nail that down, then I think, and if my colleagues agree, because I think we can see a scenario where somebody puts something up.
Yes, Mr. Cedillo. City Attorney, push your button, Mr. Cedillo.
So it seems to me that my esteemed colleague is trying to make sure that in instances unrelated to the commercial speech, unrelated to that there is discretion for the property owner not to be tied to the 2 year minimum. That seems reasonable. The purpose of the 2 year minimum is to frustrate commercial speech, but in instances where there's no concern about commercial speech, then it seems that would not apply. And so arguably we would just note that or make notice of that does not apply to those where there is no issue with respect to commercial speech. Good.
Yes, and I also just want to remind the committee that there is a change of ownership deregistration provision. So if the property is sold to a new owner, the new owner can apply to Cultural Affairs for permission to have the mural deregistered, and once that happens, they can remove it.
So that was my point, though. It shouldn't just be for a new ownership. In other words, they shouldn't have to just sell it or go down to the county recorder to change it over to a family name just so they can go through the process. If perhaps if it wasn't related to commercial advertising or something else, but suddenly they got a lot of pushback from their neighbors, for example.
themselves.
And they said, okay, or a spouse or whoever by themselves, they had a change of heart or whatever the case may be, they own the property. There should be a process to allow them to go through and deregulate it at any time.
And we can take a look at that because actually when we met with Building and Safety and City Attorney last week, we did have a brief conversation about that, so we can explore that further.
So I would recommend then we strike the language of the 2-year minimum, but allow them to go through a process of deregulation. I think that would prevent the commercial as well, because I think what would happen, quite frankly, is if somebody put up a commercial advertisement and it was product placement or something, and they got caught, we've got a system where we could hopefully go through and require them to take it down, and it's not right. But if they did so and didn't get caught, and the advertiser only wanted to pay for 6 months, and they came through and deregulated it, if you will, I think it would raise a major red flag if they came in and tried to do another one right behind it. And we'd really take a close look at what are you trying to put up here? Are there any hidden subliminal messages? So I'm not so worried about keeping that in there. If we had a way where they can't just take it down automatically, they'd have to go through a process and deregulate it, if you will. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. And so the idea was that we needed some time period that we will see this art up so that because commercial speech tends to go up and down, so we said we got to protect against that. We came up, I think, originally with 5 years, right? Originally it was 5 years, and I don't know if it was committee or the planning commission that brought it down to 2. And what's magical about 2? Is there anything magical about 2? Who came up with that?
We were looking at 2 as a business cycle, that new businesses tend to turn over within a 2 to 3 year
Now,
period.
what would be the impact if we take that away altogether as suggested by Mr. Englander?
I think the muralist community would love it.
The what?
The muralist community would love it.
If we
They
take
don't
it,
want any time limit.
any time limit, they
Correct.
don't want, you've heard that, why, okay, so aside from who likes it and who doesn't, what's the benefit? If we don't have it up, if somebody wants to take it down, it's easier for them to take it down, that's what we're saying.
And paint a new mural.
Okay.
Suggestion that why don't we do this? We keep the 2-year in, but say if they choose to take it down within that 2 years, they have to go through a deregulation process. They have to fill out the proper. So we have a process. We keep the protections in place to hopefully fend off the advertisers, but we allow a process for them to come in and have it deregulated. So that way, all of a sudden, that property is flagged to us. That if they go through the process to have it take it down, and they come back in the next week to file for a new one.
Okay.
We know
Well,
that will solve that if you're both okay with it.
Councilman, can I point to page 6 of the ordinance?
Please.
As it's drafted now in D1, there are several instances when a mural could be required to be removed within the first 2 years. And one is the property in which the mural is sold. Number 2 is the structure or property is substantially remodeled or altered.
Mm-hmm.
And number 3, the property undergoes a change of use. So you could add to those circumstances if you want a little bit more flexibility.
Okay, again, with these circumstances, again, maybe perhaps we just have a number 3.
Okay.
And the number 3 would be allow them to go through a process through cultural affairs to deregulate and remove.
Okay, we'll take that,
I mean, if we just add that provision,
Yes.
then I think that would cover that.
Okay.
okay, we'll note that amendment for now, and we'll vote on it, and at the end, along with whatever vote we take. Okay, that's a proposed amendment, okay.
Okay, I think that's all those are the major substantive issues that I have.
Okay, thank you. And I think you do raise a good question, Mr. Englander. You raised several examples of what will happen if, but what I take away from that is that we'll ask for this at the end of the meeting to report back prior to voting on this in council as to what are the procedures of adjudication to make decisions when there is some controversy out there, whether it's hate speech or obscene speech or whether it's art, et cetera. At least we are aware of what those procedures will be, and we'll ask for that report back at the end of the meeting as well. Well, thank you. So with that, we'll go to public comment. We have 3 piles of public speakers. One is general comment, oppose, and support. We'll go in that order. So I'll call two speakers up at a time. And we have a representative from Councilmember Tom LaBonge's office here. Renee, you want to go up first, or do you want to?
Yes.
Okay. Renee Weitzer from Councilmember Tom LaBonge's office, general comment.
Congratulations, Mr. Chair, for this committee.
You.
For the record, Renee Weitzer representing Councilman Tom LaBonge. Councilman LaBonge is a major art supporter. He loves murals. He'd like to see LA become the mural city. However, he cannot support murals on single-family homes. We've heard from all our neighborhood councils, from various constituents, and they're opposed. We had one incident in our Hollywood Hills that produced a lot of problems, and so we would support B without the single-family homes. Thank you so much.
David Diaz and Donna Vaccarino. I'm sorry, our public comment will provide 2 minutes, and we do have a number of speakers, so if something's been said and don't feel like you necessarily have to repeat it, or we would appreciate any time less than 2 if you can do that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I've submitted some comments. I was assuming I was out of the country and that the ordinance would be in front of the City Council. I strongly support version A. I am diametrically opposed to a number of things of B. I think Mr. Englander is completely off base. I think he's manufacturing a crisis when there's not one. He said he sent letters out to 95 or 96 of the neighborhood councils. Only 4 of them have weighed in against it. Others here, right here, have said they're in favor of it. Others are neutral. I think he's trying to get around by taking the rights of people's freedom of speech. I totally concur with the city attorneys that we cannot control speech. Even if we don't like that speech, we have a First Amendment right in terms of what that expression is, whether you like it or not. This whole thing about process is there to frustrate. The reason for the 2 years was to ensure that the artists had some reasonable agreement and consensus that their work will be there for at least 2 years. We originally talked about 5 years, so that was a big compromise. I do want to talk about the R1 and this kind of state where we are. We are not one macro planned unit development. This city is not one big neighborhood association. Mr. Englander was at Jose Gardea's campaign opening, and he told us at that meeting he was given a tour of the east side, which probably deals with both of your districts, and he saw the wonderful art. What you missed was a lot of it is on single-family homes. We have gone far on this from 5 units down, but this is a class-based issue. If we do that, things like the Green Alleys project in South Central LA will be killed. Other kinds of economic development and neighborhood revitalization and restoration that uses single-family homes as part of that process will be deemed illegal if your logic is accepted. And I diametrically oppose that. I have stated earlier, one final point, that if we have a class-based criteria that denies the majority of homeowners in this city artistic talent, I will be in state or federal court to oppose you. Thank you.
Thank you. Donna Vaccarino, and then Vivian Estela Acosta.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. LeGrand, Chairman Huizar. I applaud your research and study into this very, very critical issue. Murals are a very important part of the visual and cultural fabric of the city of Los Angeles, and they deserve to be protected and honored, and a field open so they may blossom where appropriate. I think you bring an interesting point when private property moves into public realm. And I think there needs to be some community process, which would be in extremis if there is a petition for removal of a culturally insensitive work of art. I hope that the review process to allow them would help weed out inappropriate work. I do support freedom of speech, but there's also a time and place. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Vivian Estela Acosta, and then we'll go with Barry Johnson.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Viviana Estela Costa. I'm a public artist, artist scholar, and student at the University of California, Los Angeles. I'm here today to express my deepest concerns for the new generation of artists in art making. As a student in the university, I have witnessed the marginalization of public art. And although the university is training students for the contemporary art world, it has, however, been successful at privatizing the rights of certain types of art. My question is, what about public art such as murals? Do they not deserve as much rights and protection as art in exhibitions, gallery spaces, and museums? I think that art should be allowed to exist even outside white walls, such as murals on private property. Unlike the privatized art that is well preserved and or restored, murals should also fall under this criteria. Murals are not only works of art, they are narratives of a culture, voices of the community, and a history unlike any kind found in books. In addition, as an active participant at the Social and Public Art Resource Center, a nonprofit arts organization and proud supporter of cultural art through muralism, I have learned that without this mural ordinance, hundreds of murals will continue to be whitewashed or are well on their way to destruction. Excuse me. Please take into consideration how valuable these murals are to the community and cultural history. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Barry Johnson and then Noel Hyun from Councilmember Mike Bonin's office.
Hello, Barry Johnson, Studio City Neighborhood Council, Government Affairs Committee, and Studio City Residents Association. If there was ever a city where one size doesn't fit all, it's LA. On January 15th in this room, we were told that there was going to be an overlay process for any neighborhood council area who did not want to have murals in their R1 neighborhoods. I still believe it shouldn't be yes or no to R1 neighborhoods or opt-in version A or version B. I think all 95 neighborhood council areas need to decide for themselves, perhaps in conjunction with their council member, whether they want murals in R1 neighborhoods. And if you look at the community impact statements, even ours in Studio City, which was put under general comments, but we brought up the R1 thing, and if you read all of the community impact statements, the vast majority bring up R1s and state that they do not want R1s in their particular neighborhood. However, I believe that those that want it in their R1s in their neighborhoods should be able to have it. Again, one size doesn't fit all, and I don't think version A or B satisfies either side. There has to be a way for each community, each of the 95, to say yes or no. Not opt one way or the other, but a yes or no with their council member on that particular one subject. That seems to be the one thing that generated these two versions, but I don't see that having a one or the other makes either of the sides happy. And granted, there's neighborhoods where culturally murals have been around forever, but there's also neighborhoods like mine where there are virtually none at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Noel Hyun from Councilmember Mike Bonin's office, and then David Garfinkel.
Good afternoon, council members. Noelle Hyun, Planning Deputy from Mike Bonin's office. I'm just here to express Councilmember Bonin's support on the mural ordinance and all the efforts that staff has made. We've heard a lot from our community members, and what we are hearing is that we would prefer version B. LA is a very big city, and I think taking a one-size-fits-all approach is probably not appropriate. Given that, version B, which would leave it open to specific communities to implement specific plans if they would like to see a mural in their residential area, is probably a little bit more of a tailored approach for the various neighborhoods. So we're in support of version B. There are two other issues I wanted to mention. On the grandfathering, either option that was proposed in the city attorney's, in the planning options were fine with us. We just want to make sure there's some certainty as to what murals actually are permitted and which are not, so that should we have to go back on an enforcement effort, we actually have an accurate record of what has been allowed and what has not been allowed, since that has been problematic in the past with billboards. Lastly, on the community involvement piece, it does seem a little concerning that the community involvement requirement as proposed does not actually allow any meaningful community participation. It's merely a information dissemination, as Councilmember Englander mentioned. One way or another, whether that's revising that process or creating this deregistration process that has been discussed in the last several minutes, one way or another, I think it would be helpful to have something that would actually foster community involvement. Thank you.
Great, thank you. David Garfinkel and then Nancy Friedman.
My name is David Garfinkel. I'm president of the Tarzana Property Owners Association and vice chair of the Melody Acres Neighborhood Association. We're not against the idea of murals in principle. However, we feel that there are a couple of problems, and Councilman Englander has touched on both. The one is the fact that the neighborhood involvement is strictly advisory. It has no effect. The second is that there's no limit on content. So as Councilman Englander said, hate speech can be shown. In addition, you could have salacious or other art that's inappropriate to children. We therefore would support version B and would provide a second piece to that, and that is an opportunity, and I think this has kind of been mentioned without being specific, an opportunity for a neighborhood to opt in to the idea of murals rather than requiring areas to opt out. If you want it, get your neighbors together and opt in for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nancy Friedman, then I think it's Zeus. I can't tell the writing, but it's Zeus Villegas.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm hopelessly hard of hearing, so if something's been said, just give me the and I'll go on to the next thing. I wanted to bring up one point to you that's very important to us. We are a community council, and we are not included in this under neighborhood councils, so I would ask that community councils be alerted when the notifications are sent out along with neighborhood councils. It's very important because often we don't get notified on things. So it would be adding community council where it says application for registration to neighborhood councils and community councils. That's first. Secondly, if R1 homes are included, which our neighborhood doesn't have a whole lot of murals, but I respect neighborhoods that do, and I'm delighted that we're having a mural city again. But I agree, one size doesn't fit all, and perhaps in the neighborhood notification or the neighborhood considering the artist's request, there could be some type of a vote, 50+1 or some such thing. I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but I do think you have to address this and see if there is some way that it can be fair. As one neighbor in our neighborhood pointed out, 50% of the people can stop a speed bump, but there's nothing to stop a neighborhood if there's a mural. Thank you very much for what you're doing, and we'll look forward to murals in the city.
Mr. Villegas, what's your first name?
Zeus. Villegas.
Zeus, okay, it is Zeus.
Can I
okay.
volunteer my time to Ana Siqueiros?
We don't do that. Ana Siqueiros is next, and we usually don't do that, otherwise creates complications, but Ana Siqueiros does have 2 minutes. Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank, mainly a lot of the artists and the muralists that, and you guys, the council, for addressing this mural ordinance. Since 2002, there's a lot of muralists that have not been able to depict the history of Los Angeles. My great uncle was David Alfaro Siqueiros, as everybody well knows, with the Olivera Street. He specifically did this mural within Los Angeles and also did one in the Palisades on private property. I am for Measure A, reason being that as a muralist, came into this country, he did it for the masses. He did not do it for just businesses. He did it for the people. And this resides within the single-family homes. The freedom of expression and the freedom of speech of the United States of America is also for the artist to depict whether you like what you like or you don't what you don't. First of all, if something is not ethically sound, artists themselves will address the artists themselves in their own way and their own fashion. It's a very funny thing about artists is because when artists do get upset, that's when they do get very creative. My uncle taught me that at a very young age, at 3 years old. Now, we are coming together, trying to coincide together to make this a proper and a very democratic way of bringing this mural ordinance together. I am pleading with you, restrain from using the 100-foot section stating that muralists cannot go higher than 100 feet, and allow them to do what they're supposed to do, which is create art within single-family homes and throughout. Thank you.
Thank you. David Barron and Nina Royal.
Committee members, David Barron, member of a land use committee over at Salentahunga. Of course, I'm here as a private citizen. Our city imposes high taxes and reduced services. I oppose this mural ordinance, first of all, because the only industries in this city that are flush with funds are the newly formed Housing and Community Investment Department, the city's anti-gang program, and the Arts and Cultural Affairs Department, and the fact that we have high unemployment. And our city continues to do selective enforcement of our municipal codes. Furthermore, the City Council has failed to enforce what they have already previously determined by ordinance, that the power of graffiti creates fear and insecurity within the community, whether it is displayed on public or private property. It creates a blight element that leads to depreciation of property. It also depreciates the value of adjacent and surrounding properties. Graffiti creates a negative impact on the entire city. Who will determine what is art and what is graffiti? The mural ordinance may have regulations, but the city of Los Angeles does not have the ability to enforce the Los Angeles Municipal Code equally or eliminate its history of selective enforcement. Respectfully submitted. Thank you, gentlemen.
Service. Nina Royal and then Margaret Arnold.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Nina Royal, and I'm on the Land Use Committee for the Salentahunga Neighborhood Council. To date, we are still working on our council file. We will be submitting it within the next week or two after our next neighborhood council meeting. But I would like to say that Barry Jones from Studio City is very accurate, that one size does not fit all, and that neighborhood councils should have a say in what they consider art and where they want to have it. My neighborhood council, the Salentahunga Neighborhood Council, does not want murals in our residential area. If you've ever been through Salentahunga, you will realize graphically how we are situated, and if people do not agree with what they consider art, it can be very, very offensive that we have to look up and down the same street day in, day out, because we only have one in and one out in our community. So we should have a say-so on what goes in our community. It should not be in residence because, number one, law enforcement is not upheld in our community. There is not enough code enforcement for building and safety to catch zoning snafus or what have you. How are you going to have enough people to regulate what is art? How are you going to determine what is art? How can you tell me what I think is art and what I think is graffiti? So please take that into consideration, and absolutely none in residential areas. Thank you.
Margaret Arnold and then Kathy Milligan.
Margaret Arnold. I'm a volunteer with Neela Art, the Northeast Los Angeles Arts Organization. The former chair of this committee, Mr. Reyes, used to refer to our communities as the original arts communities of Los Angeles, and we are. And as such, the arts are inextricably tied to our architecture, to our brick and mortar structures. They're tied to the many cultures that make up our communities. And very importantly, they're tied to our economic development as communities. So the fact that we have now spent a decade with our hands tied as far as being able to put up public expressions of ourselves as an arts community is something that has been very difficult to live with. And we very much look forward to a change in that atmosphere and attitude. Between A and B, please, we choose A. And I don't deny for a moment neighborhood empowerment, any neighborhood's right to opt out of this ordinance. But as Mr. Weezer has said, murals are very much a provision of a child's right to know what community he or she lives in. It's about our self-expression, it's about our self-understanding. And so with A, we can choose to say we label ourselves as an arts community, we label ourselves who we are culturally, where we're coming from, and where we're going. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy Milligan, and then Charlie Jensen.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Kathy Milligan, and I'm the Executive Director of Neela Art, which is Northeast Los Angeles Arts Organization. I am supportive of A. In that one-size-fits-all debate that we're having up here, I do believe that there are more communities that would embrace having the option of having murals on the homes than would not, and that I would like to see those that don't want it, they can opt out. As far as the question of offensive art, the comments that I've been hearing really don't give credit to the intelligence of the artists and of the building owners that would be having this art. Art is an economic driver, and it just gives such a richness. I know that in Northeast Los Angeles, we're surrounded by artists, intelligent, creative people that only want to express themselves. And Northeast Los Angeles has potential murals that will be starting as soon as you guys say, yay! Support A. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Charlie Jensen. After Charlie Jensen, Suzanne Thompson.
Hi, I'm Charlie Jensen. I'm the communications manager for Arts for LA, and I'm also a Highland Park resident, and proud resident of District 1. I just want to say congratulations on bringing this ordinance forward today. Its passage will be a great step forward in ensuring Los Angeles has a vibrant, diverse, and robust arts ecology of which murals are and have always been an important part. On behalf of Arts for LA and our network of advocates, we thank you for all the work you've done to resolve the mural moratorium, for the conversations that you went out and had in neighborhoods and communities, and for the critical thinking that will reinvigorate one of Los Angeles's most important calling cards. Thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne Thompson. After Suzanne is Deborah J.T. Padilla.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I don't see Commissioner Cedillo. Am I missing him
A little
somewhere?
break, he'll be right back. He's
oh,
fine.
hello there. Hi. I'm a co-founder of the Venice Arts Council, and since 2005, and we've been working on this issue along with Spark and other people in our community since it started. And it's very disconcerting to me to hear that our new council member, Mike Bonin, has decided to opt in for B, because Venice has one of the largest collections of murals on R1 residential properties. So I'm here to support that. The Venice Arts Council supports R1. Don't ghettoize this. Don't make it us versus them. Art, you know, people don't like nude statues. Are we going to have a naked body and they're going to complain about that? You go into our beautiful museums, they're all over the place. So have some initiative. Don't be fearful. People don't drive 55 miles an hour on the freeway. So I think it's a real fear factor here that's saying that we're going to have these offensive murals up all over the city. That's not the case. It beautifies our city, and it speaks to what you just said. So I hope the two of you have some support for A, and don't go with B, and don't be fearful of the other in our beautiful city of Los Angeles. And let's make this a mural capital of the world again. And thank you all, and thank you, Tanner.
Deborah Padilla, and then Carlos Rogel.
Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Deborah Padilla, and for the last 20 years, I've been the executive director of Spark. For half my tenure, this city has made it illegal for muralists to paint on private property. Today, Plum has a chance to change that with the passage of version A of the draft Mural Ordinance to find its way to a full council vote. For those districts not wanting murals on single-family dwellings, they have the right to adopt an overlay zone in their respective districts. Our streets and neighborhoods are our museums. Institutions like Spark are critical to the delivery of the arts directly into neighborhoods and are as vital as museums to the health of the arts in a great city. With a successful 37-year track record of public-private partnership, Spark stands ready to be of service. We imagine a day where once again, in the spirit of the city-funded Neighborhood Pride mural program administered by Spark from 1988 to 2002, which produced 105 murals in every council district of the city, employed 95 established or emerging artists, and employed over 1,100 young people. We hope to see a vibrant art reclaim its rightful place in the city that gave us David Alfaro Siqueiros, Alice Patrick, Willie Heron, Irena Cervantes, Kent Twitchell, Judy Baca, Islo Streetscapers, Richard Wyatt, Emily Winters, Noli Olabisi, Ernesto de la Loza, Raul Gonzalez, John Valadez, and Vile, and so many more. We owe the next generation a chance to paint their story and their history. Thank you.
Good afternoon, community members. My name is Carlos Rogel, and I am a muralist and project manager of the Social and Public Art Resource Center and PhD student at UCLA in the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies. I am in support of passing a version A of the Mural Ordinance, which allows for the creation of murals on single-family residences. Muralism, like many forms of cultural expression, emerge from shared urban spaces. These cultural practices are shared and often collaborative and work to challenge traditional boundaries of race, space, and region. Muralism is much a product of spatial entitlement, a way in which marginalized communities have created new collectives based on new and imaginative uses of technology, creativity, and space. Murals are everyday reclamations of space, assertions of social citizenship, and intrapolitical struggles in art making often become catalysts for community improvements, curbing crime and vandalism, and providing opportunities for youth employment and education. Spatial entitlements create new articulations and sensibilities of Black, brown, and working class people on the local and national landscape. The creation of murals in private residential areas is a part of working class youth to imagine and articulate new modes of social citizenship. Murals create meaningful spaces of interracial congregation. Murals provides a means for understanding how working class communities and individuals secure or create social membership, even while the neighborhoods and meaningful spaces of congregation around them are destroyed. Denying individuals their right to produce works of arts on single residencies defines its citizens not as much by who they are, but rather who they are not, imposing a cultural sensibility of a few on a majority. We are for the restoration of the mural form and urge you to pass version A of the Mural Ordinance. Thank you.
Felipe Sanchez, and then Dennis Hathaway.
Good afternoon. My name is Felipe Sanchez. I serve as the Associate Director of the Social and Public Art Resource Center, better known as Spark. Spark was co-founded by one of LA's most iconic muralists, Judith Baca, in 1976, and has since then helped to put LA on the map as a creative and mural capital of the world with the creation of the Great Wall of LA, 105 murals in every district in the city of LA, and now most recently including innovative artworks in LAUSD schools. Considering all of this, I think that we have a potential to become a creative capital once again, and I think we can all agree that our streets and our neighborhoods can serve as our museums. Spark encourages Plum to approve version A of the ordinance. We encourage the passing of a policy that would allow murals on single dwellings. However, we support the inclusion of an overlay of policy that would allow neighborhoods to opt out. This would allow for the most democratic and progressive policy possible. Most importantly, Spark encourages you to approve a version of the mural ordinance today so that our city's muralists can get back to work. Thank you.
Dennis Hathaway. After Dennis is Isabel Rojas.
Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Hathaway, president of the Coalition to Ban Billboard Blight. I want to echo what other speakers before me have said about the importance of murals in the cultural and historic landscape of the city. And I also support the neighborhood opt-out provision in this ordinance. However, Councilman Englander put his finger directly upon our biggest fear about this ordinance, and that is that billboard companies, sign companies, will find ways to exploit this to get more commercial advertising. And that is not just theoretical either, because the fact that the mural ordinance, or the fact that murals are not legal right now, is a direct result of legal attacks by billboard companies on the city sign ordinance. I have a lot of confidence in Mr. Fong. He and his band of merry men over at the city attorney's office have done a great job in defending the city against legal attacks over the past decade. But I think there's a very simple change that could be made in this ordinance that would help preclude the co-opting by advertisers and advertising interests, and that has to do with the sign height limit. Actually, the city code limits billboards to 42 feet. I don't really know why this 100-foot height limit is there. The higher it is, the more attractive it is to advertisers. To me, a mural is something that you don't appreciate from a distance. You walk up to it, you experience it, you see what's going on in the mural, you understand the history. 100 feet, that's an 8-story building. So I think that if the height limit was brought down to 42 feet, the same as a billboard, that would be a very good change. Thank you.
Thank you. Isabel Rojas Williams, and then Don Garza, the town crier.
Hello, my name is Isabel Rojas Williams, and I'm with the Mural Conservancy of Los Angeles. And yes, our walls are speaking. We wholeheartedly support the passing of the Mural Ordinance version A, because even if it's not perfect, it's more representative of what all of us, the mural community, have been working toward for a long, long time. We would only support the passing of version B if provision 7 on page 7, the prohibition of murals on single properties, is sent back for further research. This provision represents a limitation to the constitutional rights of all homeowners, whether they're murals or decorative art, under the First and the Fifth Amendment. In this long process, we have discovered that together we represent a powerful group of creative people, admired throughout the world. We have discovered that our artists, armed with brushes and spray paint, are not voiceless any longer. We have discovered that regardless of language, ethnicity, or religion, we'll stand together behind Los Angeles to make it one of the most creative and vibrant cities in the world. Please lift the mural moratorium at once. Thank you.
Don Garza, and then General Jeff.
My name is Don Garza, and I'm a longtime resident of downtown Los Angeles.
I first moved into Skid Row, part of downtown. Now I'm just across the street in the historic core, exactly across the street. A couple of months ago, the city did something that was very traumatic and I felt very violated, which was the citing of a lot of the businesses with their beautification and their sidewalk furniture. And of course, 3 days after we complained, Jose Huizar came to the rescue and said, this isn't going to happen, this is going to be true. But then, like maybe I don't know if it was a day later or 2 days later, I began to witness the creation of a mural on the SB Towers. All of that resentment, all of that feeling of being violated with this beauty being created, this face on that wall, very defiant, very beautiful, saying we're here. We don't want a dystopian Spring Street. We don't want a dystopian Main Street. It was just very comforting to me all of a sudden. And all of a sudden I felt all this warm fuzzy feeling for CD 14 council member Jose Huizar. You know, because I blamed you for the sighting, even though it wasn't your fault. And I think that's what's important about these murals, is in certain communities, we can, especially the historic core, and especially in downtown, where we don't have sunlight 24 hours a day, believe it or not. We live in a community that needs to have something there to beautify, to give us an emotional experience, something to lift our souls up. And to have that mural on Spring Street, it gives us ownership, and also brought our community together as one once again after that traumatic experience and other traumatic experiences we've had. Because it's a struggle creating our quintessential mixed income community. And it's not being created because we want it to be created, it's because of the clash of the different classes coming together within that part of downtown. So please bring back the murals to LA and have LA be the mural capital of the world and the artist capital of the world.
Thank you. Mr. Garza's my district, but the artist, Robert, is right here who did it. So thank you, Robert, for that. Good job on that. It's a great mural. General Jeff. After General Jeff, William Eron.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is General Jeff. I'm a proud Skid Row resident. I'm also a community activist for the Skid Row residents. I'm also on the board of directors for the Downtown Los Angeles Neighborhood Council, and this is a long time coming. We've been waiting for this ordinance to come through. Trust and believe, in the 50 blocks of Skid Row that go from 3rd to 7th Main to Alameda, we have tons of walls that need murals. You know, we've been looking at the Arts District and just admiring how they've got such a wonderful display and array of murals. But at the same time, we've waited for the process. We could have easily slammed up murals. You know, we've talked to Olga Garay with the Department of Cultural Affairs, Felipe Sanchez and Spark, Isabel Rojas Williams at Mural Conservancy of Los Angeles, but it said, well, let's wait and do the things the right way. And so, you know, we've talked to SRO Housing, we've got a positive murals, but we need positive murals in our community. There's so many endless opportunities. We encourage you to go for option A. And not only just that the need is here in Skid Row, but citywide. You know, we have to look at it citywide. And so from a citywide perspective, we have to understand that this is not like a cookie cutter solution where it's one size fits all, where it's mandatory that every residence has a mural on it. It's if on a case by case basis, if you want it or not. But in Skid Row, we definitely want it, and we're definitely ready to proceed moving forward. We've actually got tons of talent here in this room right now that we've got verbal commitments ready to move. And with the wonderful efforts of CD14, we're ready to move forward with tons of positive murals in our community. So we look forward to a positive vote, option A, and thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Willie Eron, and then Raul Baltazar. Willie.
Thank you all, first of all, for coming down here and taking a little time off of your work. I know I would be on the freeway right now on the 101 restoring John Worley's classic Galileo. But one thing that I keep having trouble with is that I don't think of graffiti and I don't think of Che Guevara's and Emilio Zapata's when I think of murals. I also think of the walls you have in here. These are also murals. I've done full finishing Venetian plasters. I've done trompe-l'oeil. I've also done design sculpted tile fountains in front of single residential homes from San Diego all the way to Malibu. I worked for Disney 3 years in Florida and also in Anaheim for 2.5 years, and have always dealt with decorative arts. And when I think of murals, I'm thinking of a bigger picture, so I hope that all the districts that really opt out really have to understand you're also opting out on your decorative art, because you cannot define it by content. The last thing is there was an article 30 some years ago, and it was called Talking Walls. So that is not a new title for an article. It's there was somebody beat you to it like 30 some years ago, and it was all the murals in East LA, mainly Estrada Courts. And I want people to know that we're advocating to restore the murals in Estrada Courts, and I'm sure glad this ordinance opting out on R1s isn't going to stop it. Thank you very much.
Our final speaker, Raul Baltasar.
Hello. I'm a recent graduate from Otis with an MFA in public practice, and I've also been doing murals since I was a high school teenager in El Sereno, and that is where I got introduced to art and politics, and a lot of why I even do artwork is in response to the violence and the racism within advertisement, and having to witness it all throughout the city. So what I would like to say is that as an artist and having the legacy of being an artist here, especially in response to a lot of the previous mural generation, I personally do not want to be limited by having to constantly appease a larger community that might clearly have a very different agenda. And especially when a lot of us public artists are being forced to have to produce something with the most minimal of budgets, and being expected to do so much with such little support by the city. And so those are some of the things that I'd like to definitely mention. I'm definitely in support of version A, and I would like to also just remind you not to put arbitrary limits on our creativity, because art is such a powerful force that you can never really do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that, we could bring back the discussion to the council members and then take a vote and hopefully move this on to the full council. In addition to some of the amendments we've made, I'm going to propose one additional amendment, and that is an exemption for the roll-down security doors. Right now there's an exemption for some of those, but some of the artists have done some creative things in Hollywood and some parts of downtown where roll-down stores or commercial areas are used to beautify the community and add some color to those corridors. So we could, on section 5, page 6, item number 6, that we keep that, no mural shall be placed over the exterior surface of any building opening, including but not limited to windows, doors, and vents, except that murals and public art installations shall be allowed on roll-down security doors. If we, yeah. Mm-hmm. In commercial quarters, yes. So we could, I'll propose that amendment. So what I have before us, council members, is the 4 amendments made by the city attorney's office. This amendment, which I just proposed, council member Englander, we will get a, want to see what you restate yours, whatever, okay.
Okay, so one is to, these are all on ordinance B. One thing, if I could, One thing that a lot of folks were saying is that if we went, they were proposing we go with A or B. And I want to reiterate that with B, I want to continue to look at a process and get a commitment to continue to look at a process for single-family homes and continue that discussion, but keep that part bifurcated, keep it in committee, not just be, but I want to move something. And so that was, in talking with the mural community and the artist community over the last several months, that is sort of what I narrowed in on. And so I support B, but it doesn't mean a full elimination of single-family now and forever. So I just wanted to reiterate that. But with that, number one, to eliminate the 2-year requirement and instead have a process to deregister. So we'd have to update page 6, number 6, where we have 1, 2, and 3, those 3 provisions. We could either add a 4th provision for a deregistration.
Mr. Englander, I was under the impression you had proposed to keep the 2-year, but to add a process to deregister within those.
It would be either way. It would be basically the same thing. So we could have, the net result would be the same. So we could keep the 2-year. That's fine.
Yeah.
Keep the 2-year, but then add a process. So it would be Roman numeral 4 for any property owner to file for deregistration.
Okay.
You'd net the same result. I guess you'd still keep the idea in, though, if we did it that way, where we would...
proactive step, and I think if we put some safeguards in that deregistration process to try to prioritize the idea of keeping the murals away from commercial speech and also to keep them up if possible.
I'm good with that. And then we'd also have to update appendix page 5B to reflect that as well, because that had the same part of it. And then number 2, the city attorney recommendations, number B, to keep the protection language intact and instead update the language to 2 single-family residents as suggested by the city attorney. So it would change that language simply to change it to reflect what it's stated in version B.
Which is that?
So that was your second recommendation?
Second, okay. All right.
So does that make sense?
I don't know, I'm a little
Your
lost
recommendation,
here.
sir. So
Okay.
it was the recommendation B. You had 4 recommendations, A, B, C, and D from the city attorney.
Okay.
So
remove
the idea
90
is,
days.
again, to keep for version B, to keep the 90-day opportunity in there and just update the language then to reflect what it says in version B. So with 2 single-family. Okay, and then number 3, to develop a process for some type of adjudication. Should a neighborhood or a council office require that process and come up with a process?
If we could make that a report back instead of an amendment, just a report back, because I'm sure that process exists. We just have to have that clear so that if we could get the report back before we vote on this in council, so that at least it's explained to us. And once we see it, if we feel we have to make an amendment, we can do it before council. But that report back, we would have to look at it to see if it's sufficient or not.
support
right?
that.
Yeah.
Wait, so what is that?
So in other words, so we would have a report back to come back to us prior to the vote in council that would spell out an adjudication process should a neighborhood or a council office require that process. Right now, there is no such process. Those would be all mine. Fairly minor and technical. But.
Okay. So we'll go there.
Did you have any more?
No, not now. Mr. Cedillo, go ahead.
I had one other thought, though. I'm sorry, but go ahead. I'll close with it.
Mr. Chair and my colleague, I want to move Measure A, and I'll tell you why. For a decade, the city has made illegal the expression of artists and a denial of a recognition of the cultural and social history of the entire city of Los Angeles. And it's done so through no fault of the artists. It's done so because we were challenged and struggling with our ability to manage cultural art in this very, megapolis of Los Angeles and Southern California. And so I offer Measure A because I recognize that not one size fits all. Because that is absolutely true. And people who have communities in which they do not believe that that's appropriate for them should be respected. There should be a process for people to have neighborhood and community involvement, and I support that. And it's because of that that I recognize that Measure A accomplishes that. And so that in communities where we've heard, perhaps Mr. Labange's community, Mr. Bonin's community, people can come in the greatest expression of democracy, come and through the process that's laid out, through a due process that's laid out, council, come and lobby and change these provisions for their interests. And it does so without penalizing those who were here before, who created this incredible fabric, social and cultural fabric that is part of our city. Now, I recognize that for 10 years that we've, as some artists said, suffered under this ban. And I don't know what my predecessor was doing with respect to that, but I know what I'm going to do today, is I am proposing Measure A, because it recognizes not one size fits all, provides for the community process that's been asked for, but at the same time does not minimize or negate or punish, if I will, the contributions that were already created and standing. We have to put this in a context that these changes were made and the ban was imposed simply because we could not handle the questions that confronted us around commercial art, but not because of anything else about the quality or the nature of the art in our community. And so I think that the time is now for us to move, to lift the ban, to recognize that history does matter, that these contributions that have been made are undeniably part of our social and cultural history. They have been there for the last decade. They have been repressed for the last decade. And so that we should lift that now, and that I offer that as a motion, and that at the same time, I'm glad to accept the procedural amendments that you've suggested, but I want to point out that this acknowledges the point that has been raised. On one hand, one size does not fit all, that there should be a process and a procedure for the neighborhoods to express themselves. But on the other hand, as the genius Willie Heron has informed us, that this art is not simply a question of East Side versus West Side, but that this is in the entire city. That when you go to other parts of the city more affluent, you see the same type of communities where people, in concert with the landscaping, in concert with their security, create art on their own buildings. And some of the most opulent buildings and homes in the city, you see that. We should not prohibit that. We should not interfere with that. We should say that those who don't want it have that option, but those who have and decided to have that should not be punished because our failings to address the question of commercial art in the city, in this region, which we will address and the courts have opined on. And so I offer that, Mr. Chair, and my colleague as a resolution for us to go forward, incorporating your procedural concerns that you suggested.
Mr. Englander, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so in moving forward, I had one final recommendation on Measure B. The difference, mind you, and I absolutely agree with everything that was stated, the only difference between A and B is single family or not. The history on this, since not everybody was here as part of the history in the last couple years, as this went out to, I believe, about 40 community meetings and stakeholder roundtables, was never discussed at any of those to bring in single family. It was one of the very last things that was ever brought in, and not to the Area Planning Commission, but only to Plum. And so I think we should still research a process to do so. I just don't think it's ready yet since we don't have that process. But having said that, what I'd like to see then is, with those 3 technical corrections on B, and I think we get there, a fourth one also on B, that we allow communities to opt in for single family for those that want it. So then we do have a one-size-fits-all, because it's really difficult to have a one-size-fits-all for all communities citywide. So that way, it's a balanced approach, and we wouldn't have to wait to bring back the single family to figure that out. So that would be a good compromise, where we'd actually pass both. And so my recommendation would be, if the chair sees fit, that we go with B, but then allow communities that want to opt in for single family for them to do that.
Well, thank you very much. And I think all the amendments and report backs that were made, I think we could all concur on those, correct? The one that stands out is whether it's A or B. And council members, I think this is one of those items that I've heard from a number of council members. So as I listen to this and listen to the audience, I think this is one of those items that no matter what we do here today, it's going to be there will be some discussion in full council. There will be some opinions, just as we see him here, divergent opinions. So I'm going to request that we move the ordinance forward with all the amendments and report backs, and that we keep open the single family item on A or B, but that we get a report back on the pros and cons of opting in or opting out on either under A or B, and how can we streamline for those communities who want to do either. So then we can evaluate what are the pros and cons of doing each one on that. So we'll move it forward without a recommendation, because I think this is going to be one of those where in council there's going to be a lot of discussion on this one item. I've heard from other council members strong opinions on both sides. So, but we're going to get a report back on, on what are the pros and cons of opting in or opting out, either A or B, and more importantly, how can we streamline either one of those, whether you're opting in or opting out? What's the quickest way to do it if any one community wants to do that, and how can we do that?
Okay.
As a technical, clarification question, so the recommendations, will those be included in the report as well?
Yeah, all the other recommendations will be included in there, yeah. Okay.
So just to be clear from City Attorney, I will prepare a new version in A and B. It will preserve the difference between the two single-family residences versus the one single-family residence on a lot, and then I will incorporate all the other changes that we've discussed into both version A and version B, and then do the report backs.
Yeah.
Council, let me suggest that what would be valuable in this instance is where we start from. That history does matter, and that in this instance we are in a position of making a community, and I don't mean any geographic community, but an artistic community, of making them whole, because they are the aggrieved party in this instance. And we need to put them back to where they were. They took no action, did not engage in any activity for which they should have been banned. And so I think history does matter in this instance, and that's why I suggest that the more appropriate one is the one that moves them closest to where they were historically and where we were historically. And that's why I believe that Proposal A is the most appropriate proposal in this instance, because it recognizes that, while at the same time pays appropriate attention to the concerns that are raised today around the questions of local interest, due process, and those who choose to opt out of this virtue.
Thank you. Okay. So we're there now. We got the direction. We'll, I assume, take no objection to the direction we've given. And the final question I have is, when can we expect this to get to council, more or less, to the city clerk?
This item can go to council as soon as August 13, because there is a 10-day notice requirement associated with the ordinance, because there's a fee involved. So it would be August 13th at 10 a.m. in council, and the disposition is to submit without recommendations the recommendations of the city attorney, as well as the recommendations from the Planning Commission, as well as the recommendations of Cultural Affairs, in addition to the report backs on the pros and cons of opting in and out of each version A and B, city and how to streamline each process for opting in and out.
Okay, thank you very much. So the soonest it could be is August 13th, but then that has to be worked out with the council president's office as to what is their wish to agenda. Is it correct?
No, Mr. Chair. Since there is a action taken by the committee today
Okay.
to submit without recommendation, it can go to council on August 13th.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yes, and Councilman, I would ask for a little bit more time than August 13th because I need to make a number of changes for version A and version B. So whatever you can do to help me and my office.
Okay, we'll work on that. That's why I said, what the clerk is saying, we have to do it on August 13th. No, I said the soonest is August 13th.
The
right?
earliest is
The
August 13th. However, the notice of the public hearing commits to a date. So if you would like it as soon as possible, it would be August 13th. However, the committee can decide on whatever date you would like this scheduled in council. You just have to let me know so I can put in
Got it. City Attorney's Office, that's 2 weeks from now? Is that enough time?
I would ask for a week or two more than that.
Okay, let's do one more week, August 20th?
All right.
Okay.
Is that the date, Mr. Chair? August 20th?
August 20th, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other business for this committee?
Public comment.
We have no public comment cards, and without objection, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.